Welcome to Asian Times TV. Today we're looking at a movie that's due to release on January 11th nationwide called Zero Dark 30. It's the Hollywood version of the hunt for Osama bin Laden, the largest manhunt in the United States history. It'll be coming to a theater near you. It's a gripping story, it's a docudrama, but it's already created quite a controversy and has picked up many critical awards. For instance, the New York Film Critic Award before the movie is actually released. The hunt for bin Laden as a background, we're going to talk to an expert named Seth Jones at Rand Corporation, who's a political scientist, associate director at Rand Corporation, has written many books on Afghanistan, Pakistan, Graveyard of Empires, The Hunt for bin Laden itself is another book that he's written. So he knows the area, and he knows how to look at this topic from multiple angles, from the standpoint of DOD, CIA, FBI, etc. So we're going to talk to him about the film. So as a background, of course, I'm sure most Americans know that the hunt for bin Laden ended in Abbottabad, Pakistan on May 2nd, 2011, bringing a painful chapter in our recent history to a close. But the mystery of what happened to bin Laden after 9/11 still remains a mystery, I think, even though we have a movie that's coming out within a year after this, 18 months roughly, but within a year after the event took place. The movie was completed. It's been through lots of editing. And Seth Jones was part of the previewing, an earlier version of the preview of the film. So we welcomed him here. Seth, welcome to Asian Times TV at Princeton TV.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us. We have with us today Kip Cherry, who's also an expert on torture or anti-torture, the whole debate that's now raging in the media in the United States, certainly, about what the movie portrays to be the efficacy or lack thereof of torture in terms of obtaining actionable intelligence. Can you comment on that?
Well, here's the challenge in a sense. The movie focuses on the hunt for Osama bin Laden, but in the use of enhanced interrogation techniques or torture, it's unclear to the viewer in the movie theater how much of this is actually directly related to the hunt for bin Laden and how much actually went back to previous years, the interrogation of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Abu Zubaydah, and so what's unclear, I think, in the movie is how much of this was actually important for the bin Laden hunt, and how much of this was simply used to gather information that's now several years old. I mean, the reality in this case is these kinds of techniques turned out not to be particularly important in identifying the location of bin Laden in Abbottabad and then sending in a SEAL team after him. So
talk about that
gets
process.
A little confusing in the movie.
Yeah. So talk about that process, though, because the movie opens for, I think almost 1/3 of the movie, half hour, is on extensive scenes of torture, which, again, I don't talk about in my article on Al Jazeera that I posted just last week. But there is scenes of extensive waterboarding, and putting one of the detainees in what appears to be like a coffin box, but smaller than literally the size of where a human could actually fit in. And then, of course, lots of scenes of physical torture, sexual torture as well, or what appears to be borderline, sexual sort of harassment in front of a female agent. All of these are obviously very sensitive scenes, and people who previewed the movie walked out of the theater really somewhat upset and viscerally kind of disgusted by it, if you could use that word.
Yeah, I think the issue as far as these scenes are concerned, and there are a couple of waterboarding scenes in there, for example. is that that it's very unclear in the movie what they were being used for. I mean, in reality, most of these situations happened years ago under a previous administration, and have been stopped since then, and were not used once bin Laden was identified in 2010, through the winter and then into the fall when the team went into Pakistan to capture or kill him, and obviously they ended up killing him. But the vast majority of evidence there was collected from signals intelligence, human intelligence, geospatial, satellite imagery, and was not actually these kinds of techniques. So again, what's a little confusing for somebody going to this movie is to try to put these scenes into context when they were actually very historical. I mean, I think what they are in reality is an effort by the production team of the movie to deal with a much bigger issue of counterterrorism over the past decade, rather than the specific hunt for bin Laden that really picked up in 2010.
I see. Okay. So the timeline is unclear, obviously, in the film, right? Because the scenes where they show the courier, the supposed courier, is identified using some information from one of the detainees, suggests, in the way the scenes are presented, that the information from this detainee in particular led to the finding of the courier.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that it's slightly exaggerated in how the courier was identified. In particular, the identification of the courier, I mean, came from a vast array of different kinds of human and signals and other kinds of intelligence sources. So
Okay.
I do think, without a doubt, the movie, whether on purpose or by accident, heavily overstates the role that these enhanced interrogation techniques actually had on the identification of the courier. And everything after that, frankly, was all a collection of other kinds of intelligence, not that.
Now, the 3 senators have come out against the movie, have openly sent a letter to Sony Pictures saying you really need to correct the misperception here that's been generated by the film. CIA, Mike Morrell, the acting director of CIA, has also come out against the movie. And so the claim that they had certain special access to the vault or multiple vaults within the CIA is also up for debate. Kip, you have a question?
Yeah, we don't have any evidence that they really did. You would think that Feinstein would have initiated a major investigation, and she certainly has said nothing about this suggestion by the producers of the movie that they had access to all this information. So it seems to me that the movie is purposefully misleading, and that's creating a major problem because it suggests that torture is a good thing. Torture led to getting bin Laden, so this is a good thing, which is far from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of issues. One is I don't know what they had access to, but I will say that the vast majority of dates and events, at least that I'm aware of, were factually correct in the movie. So there is a vast amount of information and a lot of plot lines of people and locations that are accurate. I don't know to what degree the U.S. government cooperated in any way, so just don't know that. But again, as for the torture and the interrogation techniques, yeah, there is a little confusion, I think, in how it's done. But again, this is a Hollywood movie. This is not, I mean, if you really want to, if anybody really wants to know the details of how the raid went down, and there are other books to go read along these lines. This is a movie. So, I mean, it's a Hollywood movie. And it doesn't say that every aspect of it is factually accurate, like the Lincoln movie that's out right now about the 13th Amendment. I mean, not everything is factually accurate about that. Again, it's a Hollywood movie. So I would also caution people to say this is not a documentary. It's not made as a documentary. It's not advertised as a documentary. So one has to go in with the expectations, as with all of these kinds of movies, that there are some liberties taken by the producer, the director, and the movie team. Mm-hmm. And I think that was probably taken to some degree with this one.
But don't you think that's very misleading, because they've been selling this thing as based upon personal accounts, and it has the look of being a documentary. So people are not picking up on those nuances. They're seeing a movie that they think is the truth, and going in and looking at it and coming away with their own conclusions.
Well, I think if you go to the website and the way the movie advertised itself, it is not a documentary. I don't think it's advertised as a documentary. People may mistakenly go into it as a documentary, but it's not advertised as one. And I think, again, it is a Hollywood movie, and it has to be understood in that context. So my advice to anybody seeing it is, remember, this is a Hollywood movie. Clearly, they had some access to information that was sensitive, some information that much of the American public did not have. How they got it, I don't know. But again, there is some factual, there are some truths in the movie. Some facts are definitely correct on the timeline. Some people are definitely correct. But again, it's a Hollywood movie. And I would just encourage people seeing it to remember it is a Hollywood movie.
Well, that brings us now then to the intelligence report that has not been released to the public that supposedly these folks had some access to. The committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, has adopted the report as being well done, and now it goes through a process of being reviewed by the CIA and redacted. And there's always the possibility that it may be 2/3 redacted, and we may know very little when it actually comes out. And that's a big negotiation now. And it seems to me that the sooner the report gets out, the better, because the American people need access to this information. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I think the more access to information in general, the better. I mean, there has been information released over the past several years in several books and several declassified documents on many aspects of this. But I think in general, the more information that is released in general, the better, with some exceptions. I mean, there are certain types of intelligence collection, I think, probably best not to get out into the public. But other than that, other than some technological capabilities, I think the broad subject is important to discuss openly.
Okay. I was just going to say that this is a major document based upon some 6 million documents that were reviewed and some 6,000 pages. So it's different than a book that someone has written and maybe reveals something and maybe doesn't. To me, this is the real Bible, this report, and the American people don't have access to it yet.
Well, but it's not a firsthand account in the sense of some of the books that have come out from one of the SEALs operating in the on the raid. Ali Soufan, who was involved in some of the interrogation from an FBI standpoint. Those are very, very useful types of firsthand primary source accounts of different aspects of whether it's interrogation or whether it's the actual hunt for bin Laden in May of 2011 and what preceded that. Yes, that the amount of information collected here is important, is useful, and comes from many sources. But I would also say the firsthand accounts are also quite useful in looking at, because we see debates from different agencies in the use, for example, of interrogation techniques that come out of Ali Soufan's book, Black Banners.
So could you comment on that? I mean, the FBI does not use enhanced interrogation. They have a different methodology, and it works quite well, we're told. And it doesn't have the downside of creating possibly terrorists and other people who think that we're nasty people. And it doesn't have the downside of getting misinformation the way you do with torture, where people will say anything to stop the torture. What do you think about that?
I've never conducted any interrogation myself. I mean, my understanding when I worked in United States Special Operations is, and worked with individuals from multiple different agencies, that many of the techniques used by FBI interrogators, including Ali Soufan, were successful without going across this line of torture and a real deep understanding of the individual, what was motivating him in most cases, although occasionally her, understanding the context, and understanding the different cultural nuances. That was extremely helpful in an interrogation that effectively provided information. I would say, in general, then crossing that red line probably is not necessary in all or virtually all cases. Are there cases where if there was actionable information that somebody had, that an enhanced interrogation technique or torture would be useful. I doubt it. I'm not going to rule out all cases, but I think in general, I strongly believe in the evidence I've seen that the techniques that the FBI has used in most cases have been sufficient to get the kinds of information that leads to the identification of terrorist cells, names, phone numbers. But I would also say I also don't believe that most terrorists end up being motivated by the use or the non-use of torture. They generally, there's a lot of work that's been done in the academic literature on what causes radicalization. I don't think in general it's these kind of techniques that are the causes of terrorism, but they can certainly anger a lot of people.
Mm. So what did happen to bin Laden in 2001 after Tora Bora? I'm sure you've looked into that aspect of the operation that was carried out in Tora Bora, and then he went missing. Do we know conclusively?
Yes, he spent the vast majority of time at different locations in Pakistan. He did appear to come back across the border briefly into Afghanistan, but spent the vast majority of time in Pakistan at various safe houses, practicing what ended up being extraordinary operational security measures. Mm-hmm. Even individuals like Ayman al-Zawahiri, the number 2 at the time, and number 1 Al-Qaeda leader after bin Laden's death, mm-hmm. Generally did not know his whereabouts. So he moved from various safe houses in Pakistan. Obviously ended up in Abbottabad, where he had it appeared actually was seriously contemplating moving from in around the summer or possibly fall of 2011. He didn't make it that far, but right. Believed that his house might be compromised.
Right. Which so you have information that suggests that he may have already known potentially that his house was compromised?
Well, there were indications. Yes, there were indications that he was considering changing locations. He was concerned that his house might be compromised. The location of his house and his presence there might be compromised.
I see. So on that point, none of the editorials and reviews are talking about the role of Pakistan or lack thereof in the film. All of the scenes, settings, plots take place in Pakistan for the most part. Abbottabad itself is like the West Point of Pakistan, is a military town, a resort town. But that whole nexus of the complicated relationship between U.S. and Pakistan remains kind of silent throughout the film. Can you comment on that?
Sure. What is interesting about the movie is it does not. It covers a lot of ground, but it does not cover much on the relationship between Pakistan and the United States, which has been, in some cases, quite good, in other cases, quite tense. There is very little about whether there were individuals within the Pakistan government that were aware of bin Laden's presence in Abbottabad. Mm-hmm. Very little of the U.S. discussion about not including Pakistan in details about the raid or the response by Pakistan after the raid in Abbottabad. Mm-hmm. There's also little, although there's some intimations, there's little about Pakistan's own use of torture against not just members of Al-Qaeda, but other militants operating in Pakistan. So, I mean, that whole torture interrogation technique discussion obviously includes Pakistan just as much as it includes the United States.
Right, although there are a couple of sort of very minor scenes in the film, right, where U.S. agents are stopped, I think in Karachi or Islamabad. They're driving through the bazaar, and they get, tailed by somebody, and they get stopped by someone, and one of the CIA agent gets out and, speaks to them in Urdu and says, get lost or something, or, leave these guys alone. Otherwise they'll shoot or something, I think. There's some very minor scenes.
Yeah, but that's the point. They are minor.
Yeah.
And they actually, what they don't touch on is the broader relationship between the United States and Pakistan, which is obviously a very mixed one. Historically, under Musharraf, it was probably better for a whole range of reasons, but the movie does not really deal in any meaningful way with Pakistan itself or the state of the relationship.
Right, and of course, I bring this up, of course, here only to suggest the point that, of course, that impasse, affects the South Asian region in a significant way, especially as U.S. withdraws from Afghanistan by 2014 or even earlier. Then the relationship with Pakistan across the border, from Afghanistan, of course, India by implication as well, is sort of the critical piece of the puzzle if that region is to stabilize.
Well, I think there's no question that the American relationship with Pakistan, Pakistan's relationship with a range of governments in the region, and actually the role of a range of militant groups operating in the region, I mean, all these are very important issues. And again, this is not a documentary per se,
right.
So the movie focuses predominantly on the hunt and does leave out elements of, I think it was already like at over 2 hours anyway. It would have probably added more time to deal with some of the broader regional issues.
Yeah, and one really gets the impression that U.S. was doing this mission all by itself, right? And that's the impression you get from start to finish, that it was a U.S.-led mission. They got the intelligence, which they did in some critical pieces, obviously, and then the mission is executed, which is, the latter sort of 1/3 of the movie. The last 1/3 of the movie is all about just the night raid, getting ready for it and executing the mission. Obviously, all that was U.S.-led, and you see no kind of influence from other agencies or countries or allies playing any role.
Well, I mean, my understanding was that was largely factual. I mean, the sensitivities within the U.S. government itself were such that there were few people in the U.S. government, some at very high positions, that were not aware of the hunt. Mm-hmm. And so there were concerns about bringing in Pakistan. The concerns, as has been dealt with in several books now, centered on concerns that Pakistan might leak that information that bin Laden was found in Abbottabad and that there was an operation underway to either capture or kill him. And so the operational security within the United States and with its allies was obviously so significant that it was largely from the 2010 and early 2011 period, it was largely a U.S. operation based largely on United States intelligence, mm-hmm. and then United States military actors who conducted the raid.
But they refuel, right? Is there like at the tail end, there's a scene where they do refuel? They take off from Jalalabad, of course, but then they refuel in Pakistan? Is that right? Is that your understanding?
That's what the movie depicts, correct. Yes, that they do an emergency refuel on the way out in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm. So you agree then with the BBC documentary which says that, that there was some sort of a double dealing going on, and Bruce Rydell, at Brookings is on record having stated that to the president that there was a kind of a double game going on between, Pakistani officials and what they were telling the U.S. officials about bin Laden.
Well, I think it's unclear right now to what degree individuals within the Pakistan government, some individuals, were aware of it. I mean, I have spent enough time in Pakistan that I will say I would find it surprising that in a location like Abbottabad, that some people were not aware of a very senior level person in the compound that he was at. But again, most of that at this point seems there is very little evidence that has become public anyway of any complicity. So
got it. Okay.
That's people resort to speculation. Other than that,
right. Kip, you
As sort of a final comment, could you speculate or comment about the fact that we have the FBI using one technique and the CIA using another, and apparently the preference is for the FBI technique. So why hasn't that prevailed within the CIA? Why, are there changes that we don't know about?
I think it has prevailed. I mean, I'm not aware of any of the techniques that were certainly the techniques like waterboarding that were used in the early part of the movie. My understanding is they have all ended, certainly under President Obama. And so, I mean, I think if one were to look at what the U.S. does now, that it has largely resorted to what one might call the FBI techniques. I mean, there are lots of kinds of techniques used, but right. That U.S. interrogation has not gone across that red line that it did under the last U.S. administration.
But then again, it makes the movie extremely misleading to the American public by telling them that all of these torture techniques were used to get bin Laden, which is really patently misleading in terms of the actual police work that was done leading up to his capture.
Again, I think the movie does try to look at the broader war against terrorism, which did include some of these techniques, and the hunt for bin Laden. And look, back in 2003, when Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was captured, and then some of these techniques were used on him, that they were, to be fair, they were done to try to find bin Laden, but they did not lead anywhere in 2003 and 4 and 5. Wasn't until 2010 that he was, or that his main courier, al-Kuwaiti, was identified. So, one could argue that, look, there were efforts to find him using some of these techniques, but again, the timeline is rather vague in the movie, so I think it may be confusing to some watchers how much of this actually went into the final identification of the courier that then led to the capture, the killing of bin Laden, and how much of this was really part of the hunt that had taken place, 7, 8, 9 years ago.
So how do you think the movie will be received in the Islamic world? I know you and I talked about this briefly earlier. The torture, waterboarding, and then the raid.
Well, a couple of things. One is, there are some things I think the movie unquestionably did right. There are no instances, certainly none that I recall, where there was anything derogatory said about Islam, anything derogatory said about Islamic material, including the Quran. There's the face of bin Laden after he was killed, which was quite a gruesome series of photographs, is blurred so that you can't see that. They don't deal at all with the issue of his body and what happens to it after the raid. So in general, I think they generally skirt around a lot of these very sensitive issues. What people might get upset about is some of the scenes that are graphic. I mean, I would also note that as part of the counterterrorism operations over the past 10, 11 years, virtually every major government, certainly in the Middle East and in South Asia, has used torture. So if this issue of torture and enhanced interrogation comes up, it should not be only the United States that this is discussed in context with, because there are a lot of governments that did elements of this. So I think, people should keep that in perspective as well.
So on that sobering thought, unfortunately we're out of time. I want to thank Seth Jones for giving us valuable time to talk about this film, which we'll be releasing, I think, January 11th. So it is an important film. So people should keep in mind some of the points that we've brought up here today, especially about torture, when they see the film. And tune in again next week for another issue of Asian Times TV. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.